Hey everybody, welcome back to the Her Sacred Place channel. So in the last episode or the last video last week, we talked about what is an unhealthy vaginal discharge and what we just call your natural healthy vaginal fluids. So in this week's episode, we are going to discuss the three most common vaginal infections. So there are a lot of vaginal infections out there, but this week I'm going to talk about the three most common ones. And then as we move into next week, we'll talk more about the less common ones. And then from there, we'll move on. I believe make sure you have your handy notebook your workbook that you are following me by. But from there, we'll talk about how you can prevent vaginal steaming, and then we'll finally get into vaginal steaming for infections specifically. So that's going to be really fun because I'm going to do quizzes and things like that. And gauge the audience, and I'll most likely be on Instagram a lot with that. So if you already don't follow me now on Instagram, make sure to go over to Instagram and follow Her Sacred Place. It's just like that, Her Sacred Place, and you'll see this flower everywhere. But I'll probably post videos over there with the little questions for each quiz, and we'll discuss it in the comment section. So moving on and getting started right now. The first number one most common infection or most common type of vaginitis, if you haven't heard that word before, vaginitis is basically the word for the various disorders that cause inflammation or infection of the vagina. So anytime you hear the term blah X vaginitis, this type of vaginitis is just an infection or inflammation of the vaginal region, or inflammation or infection of the vagina. So the number one most prevalent vaginitis or vaginal infection, you probably all already guessed it because many of us suffer from them from time to time, is yeast infections. Yes, candidiasis or yeast infection. So this is the most common type of vaginitis or inflammation of the vagina, and it's caused by one of the many types of fungus known as Candida or Candida. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that word properly or not. But that's why it's called candidiasis, because it's caused by the fungus Candida. So Candida already lives harmlessly in our body already in small numbers. But under some conditions, an overgrowth can occur and cause a vaginal infection. So how we were saying early on when I was in previous videos that your vaginal flora consists of good and bad bacteria. In this case, candidiasis, this particular fungus is already in our vagina. It's just that sometimes we may get to the point where there is an overgrowth because we may have used the wrong soap, or we may have washed with the wrong body wash, or we may have went to the gym and forgot to change out, or not forgot, but we may have went to the gym and didn't change our underwear in time, or we ate a lot of unhealthy foods that didn't agree with us, and we caused the overgrowth of this particular fungus, which resulted in a yeast infection. So yeast infections can come from a lot of things. I just named a few of them for you, but they also can result from hormonal level changes. A lot of my clients report that as they get older or get to the premenopausal stage, they start to get dryness and start to get yeast infections because they are associated with hormonal level changes. Another thing is birth control pills. As we know, the birth control pills are hormonals, or they do have hormones in them. So with that being said, some women who get on certain types of birth control, they begin to have yeast infections. And then once they get off of that particular type of birth control, they don't have these yeast infections anymore. So if you notice you didn't get yeast infections until you started your particular birth control, it may be wise for you to switch to a different one or do a non-hormonal birth control method such as the copper IUD, or you could switch to a low dose birth control method, and sometimes that helps women who are dealing with those problems. Also, menstruation. A lot of people report that they will get a yeast infection every month after their period goes off. That just depends on what's going on in the vagina, and I can do a whole video on that. But vaginal steaming and using the panty liners that we sell here at Her Sacred Place called the Lamo brand. We have a herbal panty liner brand. It'll definitely help with that. But I can do a whole video about that. If you suffer from that, drop me a comment in the comment section and I'll talk and we can chat about that. Another thing that we always know, and it's the early sign of diabetes, is getting yeast infections. Therefore, chronic high blood sugar is definitely associated with yeast infections. Like I said, that's an early sign of that's an early sign of diabetes, or early symptom of diabetes, I should say. I have some clients who come in and say, LaQuinta, in the last year I just cannot stop getting yeast infections. That's the first thing I ask them is, have you been to a doctor? What has your doctor says? And is there any possibility that you may be becoming diabetic? Because that is an early symptom of that. Another cause is having lowered immunity because of medical conditions such as HIV or AIDS. Just lower immunity in all can be grounds for bad bacteria to grow rampant or get out of control. So usually women with lower immunity because of a virus that they may be having, or anything going on with HIV and AIDS, tend to have more yeast infections than women who don't suffer from those particular problems. To finish up, I also want to say what everybody is thinking: antibiotics, because I'm one of those people. Antibiotics definitely give me a yeast infection. And as soon as I take an antibiotic, the first thing I say is, okay, I need a diflucan, because I already know I'm going to get a yeast infection. So I either get a diflucan if I can't begin to steam, or I start my steaming treatments while I am on antibiotics, because I know my body is prone to yeast infections as long as I'm taking antibiotics. So that the major symptoms of yeast infections include a thick white discharge that some women describe as resembling cottage cheese, vaginal itching, and redness in or around the vagina. So with that being said, that is the most common symptom, that thick white discharge and excessive itching. Most commonly, when those are happening in the vaginal region, it's most likely a yeast infection. Because yeast results from the fungus that we already talked about called Candida, antifungal agents are usually prescribed or can be bought over the counter. You actually don't even need a prescription if you think you're suffering from a yeast infection. You can just go to your local dollar store, your local Walmart, your local grocery store, and get some antifungal agents for yeast infections without actually having a written prescription. A lot of the times we as women already know what it is, so there is no need to go into the doctor and just say and diagnose what it is, because we can typically tell when it's a yeast infection. Buying these over the counter is usually in the cream form or a suppository, but it also can be oral pill. Like I mentioned diflucan earlier, that's the most prevalent one, but it can be an oral pill, usually just one pill you take and it clears it right up, but that's usually prescribed. You can get the cream or the suppositories and things like that. Like the most common version you guys I'm sure have heard of is Monostat. You could get those definitely from the store with no problem, but if you want the pill, that has to be prescribed and you'll have to get a prescription for that. Some other common brand names for things to treat yeast infections that treat yeast infections outside of diflucan and Monostat are Femstat, Miselex, Terazol, or Vagistat. So you may also see those brand names in the store, or you may see that brand name in the form of a pill, but those are common things used to treat yeast infections. So that's what I have for you on yeast infections for today. So make sure, if you haven't already, make sure to get your workbook and fill that in, because next we're going to be talking about bacteria vaginosis. So stay on the lookout for the next video as we talk about bacteria vaginosis.